All right, can you confirm that you can see my slides correctly?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, now I'll get this stuff out of the way. All right. Welcome, everybody. This presentation today will highlight information reported by the Oregon Department of Transportation in a report that began March of 2020. These reports are still all posted online and you can access them if you'd like to learn more about the traffic patterns. I will touch on the primary reporting, but in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail. If you're really interested in more, you can look at the reports, and we also have questions and after the presentation. So basically, I'll talk about why we did the report and how we did it using our traffic data. And then we were able to add some interesting regional analysis, which I think is really the highlight of the report, although it's not really part of the primary purpose, but we tried to add more and more information as time went on, and we automated our process and our text. But before I go any further, I have to give big kudos to Katie Brown. She's an engineer in my unit. I started doing all this myself. I'm not a traffic engineer. As you heard Mark say, I'm an economist. So when Katie was brought on board as a co-author, I feel like we did a much better job. And she actually took on that regional reporting part of the report. So she got to do some really fun stuff. So kudos to Katie Brown. So when the quarantine began, people were really hungry for information. And at times this report was seen as an opportunity to do much more expansive analysis. So we heard that internally to ODOT, can you look more into how people are walking, or are they riding bike more, or just hearsay was being thrown around, and we were asked if we could confirm it or reveal different patterns. But
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by.
So we did not have the data or the labor hours to really expand this report beyond the basic mandates that we were meeting for the agency. We focused on monitoring the major state highways in a manner that revealed overall patterns and trends. So that was the primary purpose of this. We had 4 distinct customer bases in mind for the report. The governor's office wanted to monitor the public response to the quarantine mandate, and traffic was one indicator. So definitely an interest there. But the Oregon Health Authority was probably the main focus because they use the traffic data for their modeling and forecasting related to the infection rate for COVID-19. So they were really the primary customer for this. Now, ODOT internally had a lot of questions as well. So I turned out to be serving the needs of many different aspects of the department, and then we would refine the report as we move forward. And finally, reporters wanted to know what was going on and beyond their region, and be able to share this information with the public. And I have to tell you, you're doing a pretty good job when reporters take your text verbatim and they paste it into their newspaper or their journal, because usually they don't do that. So I just thought that was a real big kudos for our work. We did use multiple data sources. Started out with the basic traffic data, but then as time went on and we wanted to add information, we took advantage of some new speed data we had access to for ODOT. And then also looked into some truck data for other reasons, but it fit well within the report, so we included it. So here's the big punchline that everyone wanted to see every week, and then in time that turned into every other week, and then we were able to report monthly as the economy kind of started coming back to more normal levels. So at first, the weekly reporting was very quick timeline for us. So this graph is showing you 3 years of data side by side. The most recent data for 2021 is the blue line that's outlined in black, so it stands out further. The lightest blue, basically the lower line, That's your 2020 volumes that really dropped during the COVID mandates. And then finally, 2019 was another reference year because that was considered more of a normal year. So we wanted to see how traffic volumes compared to previous years, but we had to have that basic 2019 normal conditions to compare to. And this reveals pretty quickly how the volumes dropped when the mandate was put into place. It also shows you little shocks to the system, such as an ice storm in February of 2021. And we also had wildfires, which in September of 2020. And those impacts were regional to a point, but they also showed up in this statewide data as well. Now this graph is showing you weekday patterns. We also followed weekend patterns that involves different trip purposes. So we were curious to see if there was much of a difference on the weekends. And obviously they were also impacted by the mandates, but the patterns were a little bit different. And we would go in and do a little more detailed analysis here and there if we had like unexpectedly good weather to see if people were rushing off to counties that had looser mandates as far as stores being open and activities being allowed. We didn't see a lot of that actually, but we did see a lot of people going to the coast or going to the mountains when the weather was nice on the weekends. So it's interesting that the data could actually show us those patterns as well. But as far as weekend travel, we're really back to 2019 levels, very close. So what we did is we monitored 13 state highway corridors. We did this by using 38 automatic traffic recorder locations. There were people that wanted to conduct their own analysis in the agency and also reporters that are interested in their region. So we included this reporting table so people had the data right there in front of them and they could dig in deeper if they wanted to. As I mentioned before, we integrated further information beyond the traffic data as the report moved on, and we started automating things and having a little more time for other analysis. So we shared information related to traffic speeds to look at congestion levels, and then also the truck volumes. So this graph shows you speeds on I-5 in the Portland metropolitan area. So ODOT recently implemented the Regional Integrated Transportation Information System. That's RITIS. I will probably never have to say that out loud. It's known as RITIS to me now on. And it uses INRIX data, INRIX speed data. So this example on the screen illustrates the speed for the afternoon peak hour on Interstate 5 in the Portland area. And you see the posted speed is the black line straight across at 55 miles an hour. So it's easy to see when the speeds move above posted speed. That's what happens when you see the mandates in place. Traffic really drops, so speeds approach or exceed the posted speed. Another example of a shock that really reduced traffic enough to bring speeds up to posted was the wildfires in September of 2020. This visibility in the Portland area was horrible. You couldn't really drive. It was almost as bad as a blizzard. So the traffic volumes really dropped, and we saw that in the speed data. If you'd like to know more about RITIS, this is a fairly new tool for us, but we're really rolling it out. We're using it more and more, and we're integrating more and more data into the system. I've included the link to the ODOT RITIS page if you're curious to learn more, and that's at the bottom of this slide. We also monitored truck volumes. So we have automatic traffic recorders that do bin the vehicles that pass those points into length bins, and you can infer vehicle weight size by those length bins. So we separated the traffic counts into light, medium, and heavy vehicles. And that was at 30 different locations. So really the reason that we did this was related to forecasting our revenue related to trucks, because we have a weight mile tax for trucks over 26,000 pounds. we really had no idea what was going to happen to our revenue. It was really, really a tough time for a revenue forecaster during 2020. So this helped a little bit with that. We also are interested in freight movement. So we understood that there was an increase in e-commerce. So we wanted to see what the traffic data could tell us in these areas of performance and activity. And it was a new source of data for me, and I found it very revealing. I'd like to spend time looking more into it in the future, but I think if people haven't worked with this kind of data, they should think about it. It could be very useful, more than you think. So then just for this presentation, I was curious to look at traffic volume, a real quick and easy way. And this is just an indexed graphic of the traffic volumes, all indexed to early March. So how did things change since early March prior to the COVID mandates? And you can see that a lot of the patterns are relatively similar. And then it gets a little noisy in the middle there, where September through the winter, but it is interesting just to see how there are similarities and there are differences, and it just invites us to look into it more. So I thought I'd pique your interest with that little graph. Kind of at the work level, you know, we use this automatic traffic recorder data, but there was always a 3-day lag. It takes time to retrieve the data, send the data, process the data, do QA, QC. We worked so hard to try and get this to real time, and this was the closest we could come, which is really good, I mean, from our perspective. And customers learned to accept it. They weren't too unhappy after a while. And then in the middle of this reporting, we changed our traffic assignment, or our traffic data platform. We could no longer retrieve it the way we had been. And that was stressful because we had to meet our deadlines and our mandates. So all I can say is that Oregon Department of Transportation and my co-author, Katie, they're the best. And everybody, it just took a huge team and a lot of resources to make this happen and get that data. So now the interesting stuff, from my perspective, while we're in the middle of this, our manager, Brian Dunn, said, hey, you know, I wonder if those traffic patterns differ by region. I mean, are there differences in urban areas versus rural? Or is it basically the same across the state? And we thought, well, that's an interesting question. Let's look into it. So that was Katie's job, is to explore this question. So we looked at the Interstate 5 corridor that goes north and south. Then we looked at the Interstate 84, goes east-west from Portland towards Boise. And then US 97 goes through the middle of the state. It is a major freight corridor, but it does have an urban area, Bend area. So we had an opportunity to use these 3 corridors to explore this question. And then this table is basically the big punchline for what we found. So you're looking at the corridor level values. That was what was in the overall statewide chart. That's what you saw in the table for the 13 corridors. So overall traffic in 2021 was only 4% lower than 2019. 2021 traffic was actually 41% higher on I-5 than the 2020 levels. But when you look at the segments that are rural, more rural than urban, there are distinct differences. So at Interstate 5, the Portland area is a large part of the state volume. So it really skews the statewide results. But when you looked at the Willamette Valley alone, which is urbanized, but not as densely as Portland, the outcomes, the impact to traffic is a little bit less in the Portland area. And then when you get to the more rural segment, the southern end of Interstate 5, it is different outcomes, especially the comparing it to 2019, the volumes are actually higher than 2019. So these patterns were really telling. And so we went through it for Interstate 84 and looked at how it differed in the urban and the rural area. And then we could even zoom in on little pieces here and there when questions popped up. But this was really interesting. This was for the weekday. We also did it for the weekend volumes. There we go. Okay. So similarly, we saw these different patterns statewide versus the different segments of the corridors. So on the weekend, Interstate 5, the southern end of the state, again, had volumes higher than 2019. So there was growth in parts of the area, but then Portland, where it's really dense and urbanized, the volumes were much lower compared to the other areas. And we saw similar patterns on US 97 and I-84. So that was an interesting opportunity to look at kind of the behavioral side. We did face multiple challenges. Gosh, you know, it's so easy to interpret the data incorrectly when you have incomplete information. So we had to be very cautious of inferring things that were maybe associated with COVID mandates versus other activity like weather. We had wildfires. I mean, that was an unprecedented wildfire event. And we had different days of the week. We had to align the data. So we're really comparing a Monday to a Monday to a Monday for all 3 years, and understand that the holidays affect behavior. There's construction work zones, and we had equipment failures up and down from lightning strikes and flooding and fires. And we had a lot of things to check as we move forward before we started inferring cause and effect. And the estimating missing data, that was definitely Katie's job. As a traffic engineer, she was the master and I wasn't. So I'm so glad to have an expert there to do that. And then our curiosity would get the best of us, and we would start expanding content because we were curious, but then that impacts the deadline. So we had to really keep ourselves focused on and adhere to the purpose of that report and meet that deadline, or we were in trouble. So lots of pressure there. So, you know, I guess this isn't very sophisticated analytically. However, it really served the needs of the agency, where we had customers that wanted information, they wanted it right now, and they needed it regularly, but it needed to be defensible and documented and automated to the extent possible. So we did that, and we had these dedicated contact people, so our stories were consistent and the information was valid and current. We responded quickly, kept our eye on the prize, just meeting our goals and timelines. And then we had to de-engineer it and de-economist language it and just keep it as simple as possible, but also do some education and information while we had the audience there. So it was a really good experience, I think, for ODOT and also for our customers. We have 35 reports posted online. The link is on the bottom of this slide here. They are going to remain there for a while. We no longer produce the report. We ended it July 2021. We are monitoring the counts a little bit because the health authority still needs data, but we're hoping to write like an end of year report, but I'm not sure if we'll have time or resources to do that. So that really covers everything I intended to share. If you have any questions, now is a good time to ask.
Okay, thank you, Becky. We have time for some questions. Anybody has any? Well, while you're thinking, there is Carol put in the chat box, Becky, if maybe after the questions, if you could put links to the reports, traffic reports, and the RITIS in the chat box.
Sure, will do. Looks like Elliot has his hand raised.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I'm just wondering, have you done any, it sounds like it's been a busy time over there, so no pressure, but I was curious, have you done any work to look at what that, 4 to 8% reduction in volumes on urban highways translates into in terms of congestion?
We haven't done it in a real detailed way, but we have that information now. We could do that. That would be interesting because we monitored performance on congestion for 5 highways in the Portland area. Now, I also know Region 1 of ODOT is doing their own analysis, but it's a little different than ours. So the answer is no, we have not done that kind of research, but it would be very interesting to do. And so now you've planted the seed for that kind of analysis.
Okay, there's a question from Garth Apanatis in the box. 2021 growth over 2019 in rural areas is interesting. Any additional diagnostics on the cause?
I think part of really it's a little bit speculative, but watching how the COVID mandates would designate counties to having a certain level of risk, and as their risk dropped, then the restrictions also declined. So places like Deschutes County in the Bend area, they were able to open up restaurants and have more activity earlier than other counties, and we saw more activity. Southern Oregon, they had pretty good numbers when it came to hospitalizations and COVID infections, so they weren't as restricted. Yet we didn't see as much movement from one region to another as we thought. So we think a lot of it is just kind of localized traffic, people getting out there and doing activity, but we didn't dig in super deep, but we kind of collected anecdotal information from our regional staff that were there seeing it in person. It's not much of an answer, but yeah, we didn't really have time to look into it. We would have needed a lot more data, talk to people.
Yeah, I was wondering if there would be pent-up demand for recreational travel that you would see, but that would be more inter-county travel, so maybe not.
Yeah, and we did have a question once. It was very direct. It was very clear. It was the weather was really nice last week, and did everybody, go to the coast? And that was a Portland question, and ended up everybody went to Mount Hood. But that was really interesting because yeah, we saw a pattern. It just wasn't the one that the requester expected. And we had another direct question saying, Deschutes County has Bend in it. Are people leaving Portland like crazy and going to Deschutes County? And there's only a couple of highways that go that way. And we could say, no, the flows do not support that hypothesis. So, but those are the only 2 examples that we got to look into.
Yeah, I was also wondering if there would be much induced demand because of the lower traffic speeds. That would be more in the urban areas, I suppose.
Yeah, and how would you figure that out? Because induced demand, there's a trip purpose. So if there's a lot of activity that's closed, what activity is left that people can do? We saw a lot of localized traffic, even in my little town of 16,000 people. It seemed like it was busier than usual. And yet you get out on the state highways between cities, it was very quiet. So it's really a puzzle. I'd love to dig in and learn more, but the induced demand would be hard because it doesn't impact speeds. How do you tease it out? How do you find it?
And there's so much else going on at
surveys.
the same.
Yeah, there are surveys that have been going on during the COVID, like RSG has one that's fascinating. People should look into, but we didn't have anything like that going on in Oregon at the time.
Well, a few of the people were in Oregon, but it was a national survey, so yeah.
Right.
Any other questions?
All right, well, 4-second rule. We're done and we can move on to our next speaker.